I think I'm making my first video on my MacBook Air. How about we read the book Plague by Dr. Judith Mikovits. Why would we want to read that? Because Dr. Judith Mikovits used to work for the CDC and got fired by Dr. Fauci. And it was because she refused to change the results of her work, because that would be lying. Okay, here is the description. Plague. One scientist's intrepid search for the truth about human retrovirus and chronic fatigue syndrome, autism, and other diseases. Kent Heckin Lively, Judith Mikovits, Ph.D. Plague. Foreword is by Hillary Johnson. Disclaimer. The factual information presented herein is based on the experiences, documents, and recollections of the authors, as well as the various individuals who are involved in these events. However, the conversations reported within the text are written from the memory of the authors and others involved in these events, as well as supporting documentation when available, and only represent their best recollection. These recollections are not intended to be statements of material facts, but rather the opinion of the authors and others involved in these events as to what was said and their interpretations of the meaning of those conversations. Neither the authors nor the publisher claims that the conversations are accurately recorded, and we apologize in advance for any omission or errors in content of meaning. All the people and events depicted are real. Some of the names have been changed for the protection of the individuals involved. Many of the primary documents supporting the information found in this book are available at World Wide Web www.plaguethebook.com. Copyright 2014 by Kent Heckin Lively and Judy Mikovits. Forward copyright Hillary Johnson. A note from Judy Mikovits, Ph.D., copyright 2017 by Judy Mikovits. Grateful acknowledgement is made to Hillary Johnson for permission to reprint quotes from her 2009 speech, The Why. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any manner without the express written consent of the publishers, except in the case of brief excerpts in critical reviews or articles. All inquiries should be addressed to Skyhorse Publishing, 307 West 36th Street, 11th floor, New York, New York, 10018. Skyhorse Publishing books may be purchased in bulk at special discounts for sales promotion, corporate gifts, fundraising, or educational purposes. Special editions can also be created to specifications. For details, contact the Special Sales Department, Skyhorse Publishing. info@skyhorsepublishing.com. Okay, to the researchers, the Plague's prelude is, to the researchers who labor every day to protect the integrity of their work from special interests and the patients who depend on this unbiased science. An inefficient virus kills its host. A clever virus stays with it. By James Lovelock. You do not become a dissident just because you decide one day to take up this most unusual career. Yeah, I don't never remember being in school, and they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Ever having anybody raise up their hand and say, I want to be a dissident. That's true. I've never heard that. You are thrown into it by your personal sense of responsibility, combined with a complex set of external circumstances. You are cast out of the existing structures and placed in a position of conflict with them. It begins as an attempt to do your work well and ends with being branded an enemy of society. That was by Vaclav Havel. And the first chapter is called HHV6 Conference and the Culture of Science. And it shows all of the... Here's the note from Judith Mikovits. My co-author, Kent Heckenlively, said they would come after me. It was at a dinner with him during the Autism One conference in Chicago, Illinois, in May of 2010. How could I possibly imagine that about a year and a half later, on November 17th, 2011, while I was preparing to return to Dr. Frank Rossetti's lab in Frederick, Maryland, and participate in the multi-center validation study directed by Dr. Ian Lipkin, an email would be sent to Frank by none other than Dr. Tony Fauci, head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. In the email, Fauci stated, I could participate in the study, but if I stepped foot on National Institutes of Health property, I would be immediately arrested. Is that science? The next day, several police cars would descend on my home, take me away, and have me held without bail for 5 days in a Ventura County, California jail. Darn California again. How convenient, then, for the journal Science to publish my mugshot the next week. They sent a clear message to anyone in research who dared stand by data that revealed an inconvenient truth about corruption in public health. While I doubt that my co-author expected all of that to happen to me, I don't think he was surprised. As an autism advocate for many years, he knew the enemy. I did not. I had been a 20-plus year government scientist and director of the lab of antiviral drug mechanisms at the National Cancer Institute and published more than 50 peer-reviewed scientific articles. My career was dedicated to trying to end the suffering of those with cancer and acquired immune deficiencies. Science might have many flaws, such as raging egos and turf wars, but surely it could not be fundamentally corrupt on whether animal viruses from cell cultures were possibly contaminating biological products, including vaccines. I was certain the research community learned from the tragedy of HIV, or AIDS. I strongly believed in the scientific process. I don't believe the scientific method is being followed today in important areas of government or industry-sponsored science. Or that any of those at the top of government science have the slightest bit of respect for the United States Constitution. They have gone rogue. They need to be taken down for 5 years. I have tried to pursue this matter legally, but I've yet to see the inside of a courtroom or call a single witness. And I think she wrote this in 2017. My attorney, one of the country's top environmental lawyers, says he has never seen a case of such rank injustice. Hopefully by the time you are reading this, you will be aware of Dr. William Thompson, the CDC whistleblower who revealed that government scientists deliberately removed study participants to cover up a link between earlier measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination and rates of autism in African American boys. The CDC also concealed data about a group it bizarrely calls isolated autism, meaning that they were normally developing before their vaccination. I could not believe it when I saw they used the same strategy of fraud that the CDC used for more than 2 decades in chronic fatigue syndrome, I'm going to try this again, myalgic encephalomyelitis. Whew. Okay, so CFS or ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, or myalgic encephalomyelitis. Remove all the real patients and make certain to use esoteric statistics to hide the real meaning of the data. We are all at risk. At the time of this writing, Thompson and those scientists who participated in these crimes against humanity remain employed by the CDC. Why are they not in jail? I believe the sole duty of a scientist like me is to perform the experiments that help us understand why some people get diseases and others don't, and hopefully improve the daily life of people around the globe. What did I investigate? I wanted to get to the bottom of CFS and ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and relieve the suffering of a disease that afflicts approximately 20 million people worldwide. Most with chronic fatigue syndrome lead horrific lives, often required to spend 23 hours of every day confined to their beds in dark rooms, some racked with unimaginable pain. Others will look relatively normal to the untrained eye, but they suffer with brain fog, are easily fatigued, and are plagued by the daily questions of what happened to their previous vitality. These people are robbed of their lives. I wanted to give back what had been taken from them. We found that these people were infected with a retrovirus, XMRV, xenotropic murine leukemia virus-related virus, a mouse retrovirus, which had been discovered in 2006 by scientists from the Cleveland Clinic and the University of California, San Francisco. In our science publication announcing the isolation in 2009, a joint publication with the Cleveland Clinic and the National Cancer Institute, we detected evidence of the retrovirus in about 67% of patients and in about 4% of healthy controls. I stand by that data. The only mistake in the article was the sequence of the viruses we isolated was not that of Robert Silverman, who originally identified the retrovirus. We did not know it at the time. But Silverman had not isolated the virus from an actual patient, as is done in traditional virology. Instead, he had created a molecular clone from 3 different samples. The clone he created had many mistakes in the sequence. Silverman was a co-author on our science paper, but did not disclose any of this information to us. This is a severe breach of the ethics of scientific research. Yet he was not blackballed from science. He still works and gets grants to this day. Silverman was the one who refused to do the studies blinded, making it more difficult for us to discover his errors. He covered up his mistakes for 2 years and lied to Frank and me. Others found evidence of a family of retroviruses as well, including Harvey Alter, recipient of the prestigious Lasker Award. Not just the gamma retroviruses, but the HTLV-like delta viruses that Elaine DeFreitas had isolated 20 years earlier. Elaine was also taken down by CDC fraud. What was my crime? What did I do to cause the furies of the scientific world to descend on me? I performed as an ethical scientist, as I had for more than 30 years. In my previous studies, I had worked on HIV and AIDS, probably with, what was her name again? Deborah Birx. Probably was her. When I defended my doctoral thesis, one question the panel of experts asked me was whether the basketball star Magic Johnson, who had recently been diagnosed with infection by the HIV retrovirus, would go on to develop AIDS, based on the data in my thesis. Our data suggested that the current paradigm of treatment for HIV would have to change. That instead of waiting to treat until the human immune system was greatly damaged by HIV, treatment with antiretrovirus therapies should be started as soon as possible. That was a total change and considered a big risk to take. The new highly active antiretroviral therapy so soon. Magic was courageous and took that risk, and millions of lives were changed for the better. Decades later, my answer is still sound. You can go up to Magic Johnson and shake his hand, because he embraced new data and trusted scientists, even though the thought was heretical at the time. Thinking about what has happened in the 25 years since still makes me cry. Our discovery of the retroviral association in chronic fatigue syndrome, autism, and other devastating diseases should have given the victims of these devastating diseases the same opportunity that Magic Johnson had. The benefits of the therapies far outweigh the risk. Billions of tax dollars have been invested to develop these therapies and prove they are safe in children. Tax dollars. Yet, the majority of taxpayers are being denied the benefits? My real crime was saying that if this retrovirus was causing chronic fatigue syndrome in adults, it might be causing autism in children. Our research and that of others showed that the retrovirus of its closely related cousins infected anywhere from 4% to 8% of the healthy population. Standard practice in HIV or AIDS is that when a child is born to an HIV-infected mother, that child is immediately put on antiretroviral therapy prior to any immunizations. Retroviruses like to hide out in the B and T cells of the immune system, the very cells a vaccination is designed to stimulate. An HIV-infected child might develop AIDS as a result of an immunization. Everybody agrees with that. Maybe an XMRV-infected child was developing autism indirectly as a result of their immunizations. A small study that we presented at a symposium at the National Institute of Health showed that 14 out of 17 children with autism showed evidence of XMRV infection, so XM retrovirus. You see, I gave a solid, real science answer to why parents observed a change in their child, but only after a vaccination. As my co-author discovered and reported in Chapter 5, the first outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome among 198 doctors and nurses at Los Angeles County Hospital in 1934 through 1935 was preceded by their receipt of an early polio vaccine grown in mouse tissue and given with an accompanying immune system booster preserved with mercury preservative thimerosal. That's something I'm allergic to. This has been a tragedy more than 80 years in the making. Even worse, in 1994, the scientific community reported the very real possibility that growing human viruses in animal tissues and cells used every day in laboratories around the world, then re-injecting that material back into humans, could introduce new animal viruses into human populations. Viruses previously we never had to worry about getting from animals. In fact, our research about the XM retrovirus, XMRV, in 2011 showed that this catastrophe had already taken place. It is such a simple idea, so easy to convey, that if people really begin to focus on it, the entire vaccination program would crumble. God did not intend for animal viruses to be injected directly into the human bloodstream. I'm pretty sure God did not intend that. And what are the current leaders in science doing about this threat to your health? I participated in a study to see if the blood supply was contaminated with these retroviruses. The simple answer, absolutely yes. Oh, how comforting. But that is not what was reported. Instead, they jailed me, called my work fraud, and published a mugshot in Science to make certain that the millions who were sick would not seek restitution and that mistakes of previous decades would remain hidden. They lied about it. While blood banks around the country started quietly spending tens of millions of dollars to purchase something called the Cirrus Intercept System, which my lab proved decontaminates the retroviruses in blood supplies. To this day, millions stay desperately ill, unable to receive the therapies that may give them a better quality of life. Then there are people like Dr. Ian Lipkin, the grand virus hunter of Columbia University, who directed that multi-center study in 2012 after I had been falsely arrested and my mugshot posted in the pages of Science. Read chapter 20 in the book for the full story. The same study in which Fauci promised my arrest if I walked into a NIH lab. The same study that fraudulently concluded that neither XMRV nor any similar retroviruses were linked to chronic fatigue syndrome. The actual report said that 6% of patients and 6% of controls showed evidence of infection with these retroviruses. Fauci stopped the study early because, against all odds, with me participating in retrovirus isolation by phone, we found many more positives that likely would have revealed far more than 6% and may have revealed the association with chronic fatigue syndrome. They thought keeping me out of the lab and using the tried and true CDC technique that had worked in the Thompson fraud would work again, simply using the wrong patients. The patient pool used removed any patients who had a medical or psychiatric condition that might be associated with fatigue. The condition has been known for years as chronic fatigue syndrome, and they removed any patients with a medical or psychiatric condition that might be associated with fatigue. This is what passes for science today, in today's corrupt America. But the Ian Lipkin of 2012 was singing a different tune on a public conference call with the Centers for Disease Control in September of 2013, when he reported that he'd found evidence of a retrovirus in 85% of a different sample pool of chronic fatigue syndrome. Read chapter 21 in the book for those details. However, he wasn't going to investigate that, but rather the abnormal immune markers associated with the retrovirus. The pattern of abnormal immune marker was the very thing that made me suspect a retrovirus. I reported on this on March 29, 2011, when I presented my data within minutes of a Lipkin presentation at the New York Academy of Sciences. That was also the very meeting where we presented data on the contaminated blood supply and the good news that the Cirrus Intercept system could decontaminate it. 2011, 3 years prior. Lipkin confirmed my initial findings, but neither he nor the medical establishment will investigate any further. He got a $31 million grant from Fauci and the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases in March 2014. That's 21st century American science. Yeah, we're hearing about that right now. You know how, play by the rules, play the game, put the data out they want you to put out, and they'll let you get a grant so you can keep on working. My co-author has told me he knew I was in danger because I was an honest scientist. He understood the size of the storm bearing down on me and that he was powerless to stop it. But he convinced me that if we wrote this book, it might be a lifeboat for me and the millions who are suffering because of the corruption. Lifeboat, yeah. She literally has told me, or told people if you watch any of her interviews, that's the reason she hasn't been suicided. Because once they suicide somebody who's written a book about a controversial subject, the sales of that book go off the chart and they become suspect. And that's true. So that writing that book was a lifeboat for her, and millions who are suffering because of the corruption. Even though I am now bankrupt, living with my husband in a square foot apartment in Southern California and virtually ignored by the rest of the scientific community, we have made it through the storm. We consider ourselves blessed. Frank and I are still working every day to help the victims and bring our knowledge and experience to the patients. That's true. I am so thankful for the many patients who continue to believe in me, as well as the unfailing support of my husband, David, and my longtime collaborator, Frank Rossetti. There is a disturbing pattern in American life, that nobody takes responsibility, no solutions are proposed, but all those involved ask for more money so that in some distant future we will find answers. I believe we already know enough to start making significant change in the health of millions if we tell the truth. We can find answers. Fighting an entrenched establishment that may be continuing these epidemics by following outmoded thinking provokes a response. However, the truth remains, the truth endures, and the truth can heal. This book is my best attempt to tell the truth about my research, the culture and science today, which is hostile to new ideas, and what science can really do if it is allowed to pursue promising areas of inquiry. Yeah. Boy, that was just the intro. Here's the foreword. A Disease Able to Affect the Economies of Nations by Hillary Johnson. I think I'm going to stop right here because I like to make my videos this short. And so we will read the foreword. We still haven't gotten to the book in the next video. All right, let's find out about this plague.